First thing I want to say is this video is really optional. I realized after making the whole series of videos for the second week that I'm assuming that you have a kind of comfort level with the notation that's used for inversions. Now, some of you may not have that, and because of that, I wanted to add in a video in the very beginning to kind of explain the notation of inversions. Now, over the next, the rest of the weeks, the next 5 weeks, I'll be using these terms like, instead of saying 5 in first inversion, I'll say 5/6, or a 1 chord in second inversion is 5/6/4. What I wanted to do is explain like why that is, where do these names come from, in case you're not familiar with it, and in case it's new to you, give you a kind of grounding so that you can understand where these terms come from, so that you can more easily remember them. Now, here's a triad, and this is a root position triad. And if we were in the key of C, we would label this, we label it 1. Let me do that now. Okay. So I'd label this 1. But of course in music we don't always have the root in the bass. Let me do that. Sometimes what we have instead is that the third is in the bass, like there. This is still a 1 chord, but this note is the lowest sounding note. So we have a set of symbols that we use, a set of numbers actually, that indicate that the third is in the bass or the fifth is in the bass. Now these come out of what's called figured bass. In the old days you just have a bass line and a bunch of numbers either above it or below it. And from that, a keyboardist who was trained in figured bass could actually make an entire accompaniment part. If I were to analyze this, though, let me just say, this I would label as a 1/6. And so you'd say, well, why? Why do you call this a 1/6? It has everything to do with the intervals between these notes. Maybe I should step back and say that although we just call this 1, technically this is 1/5/3. Don't ever write that, but this is technically 1/5/3. Why? Well, if we look at the farthest interval from the root, we see it's a fifth. And then the one below that is a third. And so if we look at this, we see that this is a sixth and this is a third. So technically what this is, let me get that. Technically what this is a 1/6/3 chord. Let me then repeat this and shift that up there. Now we have the fifth in the bass, and we see that we have 6 between the lowest note and the highest note of the chord, and 4. So this is actually what we call 1/6/4 chord. Now in notating these things, though, we try to be as brief as possible. So in this one, even though it's technically a 1/6/3, we actually just notate it as 1/6. This one, well, because this already has the 6, we need the 4, so we notate this as 1/6/4. Okay, well, let's take 7th chords, and I'll use the 5/7 for this to illustrate. So if we saw this chord, we'd say, oh, it's a 5/7. But what happens if we take it and we put it in inversion? Let's say first inversion. Let's take this note, put it all the way on the top. Well, now we'll do the same trick, yeah? We measure from the top to the bottom. We have a 6, a fifth, and a third. So this is technically a 6, 5, and actually somehow you're supposed to be able to put in a 3, but I don't know how to put in a 3. This is technically a 6/5/3 chord, but we don't, in notating it, we don't put in the 3. We just notate this as a 6/5 chord. Let's keep going. Repeat that. Shift this up to the top. Now we have the fifth in the bass. Well, let's see what we got. We've got a 6 and a 4 and a 3. Well, if we only use 6/4, that would just say that it's this chord, and that's not true, right? So if we needed to boil this down to two numbers, probably better to say that it's a 4/3 chord, and we'll assume that the sixth is in there. Let's keep going. Because while we only have two inversions with the triad, we have three inversions with the seventh chord because there are four notes. So let's shift this one up there. Now we've got the seventh in the bass, and let's look what we've got. We've got 6, we have 4, and we have 2. Well, again, 6/4 won't help us because this is the 6/4 chord. So probably something like 4/2 might make the most sense. And this is the notation that I'll use. Now, in fact, some even abbreviate this further and just call this a 5/2 chord. I won't use this notation, but understand that it's the notation comes out of the same process we were just talking about, where we don't have to put down every interval that exists in the inversion. We just put down the ones that are necessary to indicate that it's a certain kind of inversion. So I'll call this a 4/2 chord. Now, you may say, okay, that's all fine, I understand that when I see it like this, but what if we have that, what if we have that chord? Let's take that 5/4/2 chord again. And we do something like this. It's voiced like this. Well, you know, you'd say, well, this isn't a 5/4/2. This is like what's the interval here? This is like I don't even know what it is. But the smallest interval is a ninth, and the one after that is, you know, whatever. It's an octave and a sixth, so it's like, what's that, a 13th? And no, we don't analyze that way. You just have to recognize the chord. We say this is a 5 chord, and you see that the seventh is in the bass. And from there, you just say it's a 5/4/2. So it doesn't really matter, you know, if it was like this. We can leave that there. Well, this would be very bad voicing, but nonetheless, you see, it doesn't matter if it's voiced like this, however it's voiced, or if this was even up an octave like that. It doesn't matter. All of these that I've just put down here are all 5/4/2 chords. And the 4/2 is just telling us what the bass note is. So I hope that gives, for those who needed it, I hope that gives a kind of framework for understanding the theory behind the notation of inversions. And now we should begin really with week 2 material, talking about basic progressions with inversions.